So you know how like fantasy games are based on fantasy books,
Yes.
yeah? And fantasy games have features like you have a deck of qualities and numbers that attach to them, and you know what your statistics are, and those statistics might go up as you progress through the
Yes. Yeah.
game.
Yeah.
So you have games that are based on the books. You now also have books that are based on what it would be like to be a person if the character were a person in the game.
Right.
So the
hmm
character will be drawn into a scenario where, for whatever reason or however the author sets it up, they and are aware of their own game playing and skill acquiring
Wow.
process. Sometimes with like a voice talking to them, sometimes they have a HUD, sometimes they have some internal
hmm
meter. I It's so
Mm.
fascinating as a kind of a reflection of the progress of fantasy and sci-fi genres, the ways in which people who've been reading those books and playing those games now want to imagine what it would be like if you weren't just playing the game but being
Yes.
in the game. And I have a recommendation for this if it sounds like it's up your alley or interesting. Dungeon Crawler Carl is the
Right.
recommendation.
I'm making a
Um,
note.
it's Yeah, please. I think you would really love it. It's
Mm-hmm.
funny. Um, and D- Dungeon Crawler Carl is written by Matt Dinnerman. There are like 10 or 11 books. You're plunging into a series. It's so readable. It's so chatty. It's like the tone of it is really light and
Mm-hmm.
fun, but it's dealing with some sort of more intense issues at
Mm.
moments. The premise is this guy, Carl, sort of grumpy man whose life isn't going particularly well, steps outside. Oh, I've zoomed
When you
in.
said the word grumpy, suddenly you zoomed in.
That's because Chris Skinner, who's the producer of this podcast, sent me this camera, and it's an AI camera. So we're living in the future, and the AI camera has hand gestures that you can do um, to make it
Oh.
zoom or unzoom. I need to figure out what exactly hand gesture I need to do. Anyway, the point was backing
hmm
up, make it go, make me announce. um, um,
This is for a sci-fi
we live in the
fantasy
worst possible
podcast. The
future.
technology turning against
Yeah,
you in the sort of third act is very on brand.
I should have. I should have practiced this. It's just making it worse. I don't know. I don't know.
We're keeping all this in, right? This is gold.
I'm the worst wizard in the world. Oh
In this
man.
instance, would your
Uh,
character have rolled a 1 for understanding how the camera works?
yeah, a one for practicing the technology that you're
Yeah.
putting in. I just never expected to need to use the function, but I knew there was a hand gesture, and now I know what it is, and I'm trying not to make it. Backing
Mm.
up, uh, our hero is
Mhm.
Carl. He wakes up at 4 o'clock in the morning and goes out to get his cat, or his girlfriend's cat, Princess Donut.
Mhm.
And as he steps out into the cold, cold, cold night in his bare feet and boxer shorts, every single building on Earth collapses into the core of the world. And the only people who happen to be outside at the time
Ah.
are
Mhm.
alive, and they're on the outside, and then they get given the choice through a loud voice that comes in somewhere in their brain, that they give them the choice to enter the dungeon,
Nice.
or they can stay
Yeah.
outside and they won't be hurt, but they also won't be helped, and there's no infrastructure on the surface of the planet, so they'll be in a bit of
Mm.
trouble. But you know he goes in to one of these doorways that appears and takes him into the center of the earth, and uh, in the process of entering the dungeon, Princess Donut the cat also becomes a sentient player, and they have to figure out their way through these games and
Mhm.
levels towards the center of the earth. And then there's people watching on other planets, and they have to figure out what happened to their planet and how they're going to go on from here. And it's really funny and really silly and like solidly good. I would recommend it for people who have never heard of LitRPG. It's a really good crossover book. It's a really good entry point to the genre. If you're not a massive gamer, it will also make total sense to you. It's really, really fun.
I feel
Dungeon
like
Caller Carl, Matt Dinnerman. The audiobook is very good of it as well.
that it feels like it's going mainstream, that whole the sort of meta narrative that we have. If you look at things like, I guess, even from like the Lego movie to Barbie, people are slowly getting more and more used to that idea about sort of the stories within stories and things that people are telling, where we sort of you enter the fictional world, and then maybe you also have access to the outer world as well. um a friend of mine, I think it's public knowledge, is writing the Sims movie, and while she hasn't divulged what happens in the Sims movie, you sort of feel like there are two versions. One is it's completely within the Sims world, or the other is, like you say, there are people and they're aware of being controlled by some external force that maybe they go on to communicate with or something. But it feels like that kind of storytelling is becoming more mainstream.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly a really fun and interesting thing for someone who is as pickled
Mm.
in genre as I am to see all these incredible new subgenres emerging in the world. And part of it, I think, is to do with, fan fiction and people's desire to kind of really hyper specialize their own interest and like follow their own algorithmic
Mhm.
path, but also determine that to some extent for themselves rather than having it spoon fed to
Yes.
them.
Yeah.
So that is our subgenre submarine into lit RPG and progression fantasy.